When the earlier theologians had recognized four schools of thought as being equally orthodox, they had conceded tacitly that there was room for differences of opinion in the interpretation of the sacred texts. Considerable rigidity, however, had crept into the thought of later scholars because they were afraid that the recognition of too many differences would breed anarchy of thought and encourage the rise of heresies. The prevailing opinion among the orthodox was that the later day ijtihad should not go further than the four walls of the recognized schools. Besides, the followers of one school should normally not borrow the rulings of another unless they were forced by necessity. This attitude had sought safety in imposing limitations which tended to make the demarcation between the four schools too rigid, besides imposing restrictions on the human intellect in understanding the truth of religion. Shah Waliullah tried to remedy this without paving the way for license in religious thinking by emphasizing that the doors of ijtihad had not been closed and pointing out that it needed both erudition and caution. As progress does not imply throwing overboard the work of previous generations of scholars, he recommended an attitude of respect for unanimity achieved by thinkers of the past. This was in keeping with the general trend in Shah Waliullah's thought, which was progressive without being destructively radical. This attitude was also calculated to prevent the development of fresh differences through the introduction of new interpretations out of harmony with previous thinking. He also laid down the principle that for those who are not qualified for ijtihad, it was incumbent to follow the rulings of competent mujtahids. Shah Waliullah tried to bring about conciliation in another field as well. The doctrine of monism had been the subject of controversy among the Sufis since the days of Mujaddid al-Fasani. He fully upholds the contention of the Mujaddid that any mystic experience which does not conform to the dictates of the Quran and the Sunnah must be rejected. In this way, he tried to remove the conflict which had grown among the Sufis without encouraging the heresies which had tended to seek shelter in Sufism through its doctrine of monism. The worst fissure in the body of Indian Islam at this time had been caused by hostility between Shias and Sunnis. It was in the effort to smooth over these differences that the real greatness of Shah Waliullah in the field of conciliation of different points of view is demonstrated. He wrote a work on the caliphate in which he discussed the whole question in a conciliatory manner and tried to remove the misconceptions of the Shia about the personalities of the first three caliphs. There were many Sunnis in those days who believed that the Shias were not Muslims at all. He boldly stood up against such opinions and laid it down that the Shias were not outside the pale of Islam. This tradition of tolerance was so well established by him that his son, Shah Abdulaziz, was accused of Shia leanings by some extremists for following in his footsteps. There can be little doubt that Shah Waliullah succeeded through his writings in laying the foundations of understanding and tolerance among the various sects of Islam in the subcontinent, which, in spite of occasional setbacks, has since maintained traditions of sectarian tolerance. The establishment of good relations between different sects of Islam was the remedy for only one symptom. There had grown up differences because of economic and political maladjustments as well. Shah Waliullah made a deep study of these maladies and reached the conclusion that society was suffering from a lack of equilibrium. The imbalance between the functions and the performance of the different organs had brought about such a deterioration in its working that there was little relationship left between production and consumption. He castigated everyone who was a burden either upon the public funds or upon public economy. He rightly laid great emphasis upon the economic well-being of the peasantry and the craftsmen because this was the basis of a sound economy in those days. At the same time, he did not want them to be impervious to moral considerations. To be good members of society, they also had to cultivate habits of hard work, honesty, and efficiency. He considered it of the greatest importance that everyone should do productive work to earn his livelihood. He laid the utmost emphasis upon the principle of adl and tawazun, justice and equilibrium, without which society cannot endure. The principle of adl, he explained, is the very life of all political and social organizations. Freedom, government, and good life all depends upon it. The maintenance of tawazun or equilibrium is, according to him, mainly dependent upon healthy economic conditions. The health of an economy can be secured only by a proper distribution of wealth. Shah Waliullah laid great emphasis on the necessity of removing all forms of economic injustice and tyranny, because when a group is reduced to a level where it must work like animals to earn a livelihood, it loses its social virtues. Similarly, when some people give themselves up to accumulation of means of pleasure and enjoyment and become addicted to extravagance, they injure the economic well-being of society. Productive work which is devoted to the satisfaction of the valid needs of society is the basis of economic health, because until the mind is free from economic worries, it cannot devote itself to higher pursuits. It is obvious that Shah Waliullah believed that spiritual progress was not attainable by a society that was starved for the essential needs of life. Shah Waliullah was of the opinion that social organization is not static in its nature. As society progresses, groups tend to federate and even coalesce, and thus increase both the scope and the function of social organization. This tendency to seek identification with increasingly large groups also arises from the fact that the larger the unit, the greater is the protection it can give. Even the establishment of a good polity by a small group does not secure for it freedom from danger of aggression on the part of other groups. Hence, the search continues for a power to protect the weaker from the aggression of the stronger. The highest achievement of social progress, according to Shah Waliullah, is the establishment of a society where such aggression becomes impossible and the conflict among polities is eliminated. He believed that Islam embodies within its teachings those natural principles that sustain beneficial social organization and work for its progress. Shah Waliullah therefore contends that ordinances of Islam are not based upon the arbitrary will of God. He has revealed what is beneficial to humanity. God is not a tyrant reveling in getting himself obeyed for the satisfaction of exacting obedience. Such a conception is unworthy and erroneous. Shah Waliullah went into great detail and showed the beneficial nature of the obligations laid down by Islam. This was not intended merely as an exercise in scholastic philosophy. If the Muslim community in the subcontinent was to be rescued from the moral decay that had overtaken it, no progress could be made without delivering it from the schizophrenia of believing in the law but discarding it in practice. It had to be demonstrated to the Muslims that there was a direct relationship between the morals of the individuals and of the society and their condition. A religion can be mere escapism when it is taught that the right belief and a strong faith in the love of God, who will forgive us all our trespasses, is all that is needed to be a believer. Shah Waliullah did believe in the love and mercy of God. He was a Sufi himself, but he wanted the Muslims to realize that their religion laid great emphasis upon those virtues as well that would enable them to lead a well-ordered and beneficial social life, because man could not find his fullest fulfillment without belonging to a healthy and well-integrated society. Knowledge, however, does not always give such fervor as translates belief into action. This was the reason why Shah Waliullah continued the tradition of combining theological education with mystic training. This was not an innovation. Shah Waliullah felt inspired by his mystic experiences to make his Herculean efforts for the regeneration of Muslim society in the subcontinent. He, however, was not unaware of the dangers inherent in unbalanced mysticism. He warned the community against following spurious mystics. Shah Waliullah was of the opinion that too much rigidity and strictness defeat their purpose. If religion was not to be discarded as impracticable and its ideals forsaken as impossible of achievement, it was necessary to interpret its injunctions with leniency. He therefore castigated those theologians who discarded the more lenient interpretation in favor of the more difficult. This attitude was in keeping with his general preference for moderation and compromise. Indeed, most of his views were the result of his constant endeavor to shun extremism of every kind and bring about compromise in place of conflict. He did not want the Muslims to become a part of the general milieu of the subcontinent. He wanted them to keep alive their relations with the rest of the Muslim world so that the springs of their inspiration and ideals might ever remain located in Islam and the traditions of the world community developed by it. Shah Waliullah considered political authority indispensable for the health of a community. He could not shut his eyes to the disasters that confronted his people after the decline of their political power. It is true that he did not succeed in stemming the tide of the political decline, but he aroused those urges in the community which gradually enabled it to win back some of its moral fervor and to maintain the purity of its doctrine. The rescue of the community's conscience, its beliefs and its faith in its moral purpose from the debris of the 18th century was no mean achievement in itself. Shah Waliullah, however, achieved even more. Through his works, he made lasting contributions to so many fields of Muslim thought.